Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Lancaster University China Centre and Confucius Institute's jointly hosted seminar event this afternoon. My name is Andrew Chubb. I'm the Director of Engagement for the Lancaster University China Centre. And today we're really delighted to welcome along Vittorio Tantucci, who's a lecturer of Chinese and linguistics at Lancaster University. And his research is focused on really usage-based intersections of pragmatics and cognition, investigating these both typologically and cross-culturally. Together with Aiqing Wang from the same department, Vittorio has built a really fascinating research agenda around subjectivity, intersubjectivity, and how that relates to theories of mind. And he's investigated this through fascinating studies looking at early childhood language acquisition, how language develops over time in people, cross-cultural variation, and that's going to be closely related to what he's going to be talking about today, as well as how intersubjectivity evolves over time. So really a feast of ideas and new empirical findings about how our minds work and how that relates to how we use language, which of course in the case of China is particularly interesting for all of us here. So just a couple of housekeeping messages first of all. The seminar is being recorded, so all the presenters and myself will be recorded, but the audience will not be recorded. A recording will be available afterwards if anybody else hasn't been able to make it who wanted to come. Recording will be available, I think, at the same Teams link. We're going to have a Q&A session after Vittorio's talk, so feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A box at any time. They will be fielded and moderated by our people in the back room. And if you have any technical issues or difficulties with the seminar, please feel free to make a post in the Q&A at any time, and our moderators can get in touch with you privately and help you sort out any issues that you might have. So without further ado then, I'm going to hand over to Vittorio, and Adam, if you can switch the cameras across and put Vittorio's slides up on the screen, then we'll be ready to go. Vittorio, the floor is yours.
Well, hi, Andrew. First of all, thank you very much for having me here and for inviting me to deliver this talk. I will now start sharing my screen once again so that you can all see what should be on the screen. Thank you very much to all of you for being here. It's a pleasure to share my ideas with you. Given the nature of this talk, my intention is to make it as accessible as possible. So and believe me, this is going to be quite challenging because of the nature of this analysis. What I will be reporting here is essentially the results of a paper that I published with Dr. Aiqing Wang in 2018 for the Journal of Pragmatics. And it essentially underpins the way we make evaluations in different languages. So, and more specifically, as this event has been organized by the Lancaster University China Center in combination with the Confucius Institute, I will be focusing on Chinese. What is of interest for this present talk, this present seminar, and this analysis is essentially the way we express our opinions in different languages and in different cultures. So when do we say something like, I think that, I believe that, I feel that, or you should, or she could, or blah, blah, blah. We always think of this as a universal phenomenon, something that is just like, it expresses the meaning of what we think. And the aim of this study, this paper, is to try and prove this assumption wrong. Okay, so to start with, what are the main points of discussion of this analysis? I will first introduce evaluative speech acts. So what is basically an evaluation in language? What characterizes an evaluation? Then I will be moving on to the culture-specific nature of phase and rapport. And these notions underpin the way we project our social image and the way we try to profile this throughout interaction with our interlocutors. So how do we care about the way we appear in society in the eyes of other people? I will then move on to the to sort of make our hands dirty and look at the methods that we use to try and show how evaluations may vary from one language, one culture to another. And as a result, I will be focusing on Mandarin evaluations in contrast with American English evaluations. So evaluations from a Semitic language in contrast with a Romance language. And finally, we will be looking at some interesting machine learning results and fitting of this analysis, and what does this entail also for artificial intelligence and machine ability to simulate humans' evaluations and humans' projected feelings and emotions on addressees when evaluations are made. All right, let's start from a very previous video, which I will, I think, run a couple of times. That might be useful for the continuation of this talk.
我就喜欢这类的作品，然后就想自己也写一个玩呗。可能有这样的想法吧。不知道，我就觉得我写这个能写好吧，可能也是。会有。
All right. So this guy is called Li Dan. He is a presenter, he's a comedian, he's also a writer, he's a personality in China, and he's basically like, this is an interview with him. And as you can see, he makes 2-3 evaluations. He first say, hey, I like that kind of words, 我就喜欢这一类的作品. And then said, so I thought of writing one for fun. 然后就想自己也写一个玩吧. So, and 写一个玩呗. And so then he makes an evaluation. And as we can see, there is a little particle appearing here at the end of the sentence. Bear in mind, in Chinese, this particle doesn't contribute to the propositional meaning of what is said. It's something, a surplus that is added at the end of the sentence. Right? And he goes on to say, probably that's what I thought. 可能有这样的想法吧. Again, he made a new evaluation and he said, probably that's what I thought. And again, we have this strange new particle at the end of the sentence. But again, this little thing here doesn't contribute at all to the proposition, to what is being said. So in order to convey what he's thinking, he wouldn't need this. He wouldn't need what he said just before. And then, oops, sorry. And then, oh, mamma mia, the technicalities of doing things, online. And then we have a final evaluation. 我就觉得我写这个能写好 but even here they didn't add it to the subtitle, but there is a new pa at the end of a further evaluation. I thought that if I wrote that, the results would be good. But once again, he could have said whatever he said without this thing. Let's listen to this once again as it occurred naturalistically.
我就喜欢这类的作品，然后就想自己也写一个玩呗。可能有这样的想法吧。不知道，我就觉得我写这个能写好吧，可能也是。会有。
All right. This was just something to keep in mind for the continuation of this talk. because as we will see, these particles at the end of sentences in Chinese are all over the place. And we will see how important are these little things for Chinese interaction to unfold successfully from one interlocutor to another. All right. First and foremost, I think for the ones of you who are not experts in my field of research, I think it's worth saying, explaining very briefly what is pragmatics, which is one of the areas of my research. Pragmatics is one of the fields of linguistics that is focused on interactional behavior in context. From ancient Greek, pragma, pragmatos means action, all right? So pragmatics, in other words, deals with how do we do things with words. So we all have, and many of us have, the idea of linguistics as being mostly concerned with structure, with nouns, pronouns, verbs, adverbs, and stuff like that. However, that's not the end of the story. There is so much more in linguistics, and one of the fields that are most crucial for also development of artificial intelligence is precisely pragmatics nowadays. So in pragmatics, words and phrases count, but what counts the most are the actions that we perform through language. So what we call speech acts. So from a pragmatic point of view, language is a way to perform actions. So is inherently enactive. We do things, we say things in order to achieve things. Imagine when if you are married, when you have been pronounced husband and wife, that was a speech act. And that speech act changed completely your life, right? Because that bears a social recognition, right? A collective recognition. Or when I say just leave, just go. And when I give you an order, and that's a directive speech act, that again is language used in order to change the conditions of the word, right? So speech acts are of various kinds. Here I am referring to a classification that is very common and which is given by Searle and van der Weken. So they are verbal actions through which we accomplish something. So we can greet, we can insult, we can compliment, we can flirt, we can get work done. So a classification generally, a very broad one, includes 5 categories. So we have representatives that occurs when there is some sort of information transmission. So assertions, statements, hypotheses, evaluations as well. Then we have commissives. So when we commit, we promise that we will do something in the future, such as promises, oaths. Directives, so when we want to get something done through an addressee, so when we want the addressee to do something as a result of what we are saying, so commands, requests, questions, invitations, they're all directives. Declarations are what Searle considers the most important speech act in human evolution, because they're the ones that actually change the state of affairs of society. So when we have blessings, baptisms, the Declaration of Independence, it's a declaration, it's a speech act, right? The writing of the Constitution, it's a speech act. Declaring a ministerial, and so on and so forth. Fining someone is a combination between a declaration and a directive. So these are speech acts that bear a very important collective recognition in society. And finally, expressives, when we express our psychological states or our emotions. So what sort of speech acts are evaluations? Evaluations are a bit of a combination of what Searle defines assertions as affirmations of some proposition or some state of affairs, and expressives. Sometimes, I don't know if you can see me, but sometimes I will take a few seconds just to to have a quick sip of water. So this study, the present study, is centered on modalized evaluations, so evaluations that include a modal component, that include a modal qualification of a proposition in terms of certainty, obligations, wants, and so on. So evaluations are used to express the speaker's stance, epistemic stance, or in other words, his or her belief. And they are interesting in the sense that they allow what I call factual distancing, but they do not allow evaluational distancing. So of these three sentences that we have here, only the third is an evaluation. The first is an assertion, so it includes an assertive locutionary force. It's raining. So when I express this, I am simply providing a fact. It's a factual state of affairs, right? I am not, doubting, I'm not casting any doubt about what I'm talking about. That's the reality. So it's raining. I cannot complement this clause with, but I think it's not. So this is a sort of evaluational distancing. I cannot rebuke what I just said in terms of evaluation. And I cannot even say, but I'm not sure. So a factual distancing. I cannot rediscuss the state of affairs that are given factually in one. When I present information, this is what journalists do normally. When we refer to some sort of information, both are available, and that is because when we provide the source of evidence, I was told that apparently it is the case, it seems that, I heard that. In all of these cases, the factual status of what we are saying is suspended. So we are not really committing to what we are saying. We are playing very safe, so in other words. So apparently it's raining. I can absolutely say, but I think it's not personally, evaluational distancing, but I'm not sure, factual distancing. In both cases, it works. Finally, and these are the speech acts of that we will be looking at in the present inquiry. Evaluations include they allow for a factual distancing, but not for an evaluational distancing, because it will be a self-contradiction. So I can say what I think it's raining, but I cannot say, but I think it's not, right? It doesn't quite make sense. However, I can cast doubt on the degree of certainty of my belief, and as a result, I can take a distance in terms of the factuality of the proposition. All right. Having said this, we will be focused on modalized evaluations. Evaluations that include some sort of modal auxiliaries. And as we can see, things like can do not allow an evaluational distancing, as we said before. So if I say help can be summoned from CET or other services merely by pressing a button on a pendant worn around the neck, although I don't think so. Doesn't make sense. Why? Because this is an evaluation in broad terms, and we cannot rebuke this with evaluational distancing, as we said just here. All right. Having said this about evaluations, one question may arise, which is the question that actually drove this study. So are evaluations realized in the same way in the world languages? So is linguistic specificity, linguistic relativity a factor for mismatches in the way we realize evaluations? Or we do express the way we think in the same way, no matter what language we speak, no matter what culture are we part of? So this is what this study will be about. So when we look at evaluative force and modality, we look at modalized utterances that are characterized by some sort of evaluative force. So they have, in certain terms, a worst world direction of fit. Don't be too scared if you don't get this. It's going to be totally fine throughout this talk, even if this is not clear. This is simply a working definition for the type of utterances that are going to be included in this study. We will actually, this is going to be very important on the other hand, we will look at the evaluative interaction that hinge on what we call face work. That is the speaker's intention to overtly account for the hearer's persona and the way this persona might react to what we are saying. This is to say that when we say what we think, we don't do it as computers, right? We don't simply transmit information to our addressee. We are also very likely to take into account how this addressee might feel, might react as a result of our evaluation. If I say, I think you're an imbecile, I might have been cautiously thought about the reaction, unpleasant reaction, the unpleasant effect that this sentence may have on the addressee as a result of what I'm saying. And this is a very important dimension of evaluations, we think, cross-linguistically. That is, saying what we think might not be the same in all languages and in all cultures. It might be that in some cultures, we care a bit less about how the addressee will feel or think as a result of what we are saying. In other cultures, our concern about this might be stronger, and that's what this study is going to be about. In other words, we normally express our opinions to some addressee, and we do that to someone with, of course, someone with a social identity, right? So with a projected image of him or herself as she believes to be perceived by others. And this is what in pragmatics is called face, right? Face is a social notion. All right. So face is first introduced by Goffman as the social image of the self and the interlocutor's desire to be perceived in a similar way by others. This is to say that when we talk with one another, we don't simply talk with someone as a black box. We talk with someone with the awareness of the way this person will perceive our social image as the result of our interaction. And this social image is constantly altered by the way we talk with this person. So throughout an interaction, we might negatively affect the face of our interlocutor, as well as also damage our own face. So our mutual perception of our role in society is inherently affected by the way we interact with our interlocutors, and our face changes all the time, right? In a very influential work written by Brown and Levinson in 1987, there are two versions of face that are defined. There is a negative face hinging on personal rights of an individual that include his or her personal freedom. So the idea that when you talk to me, you shouldn't really, you should be careful of not being too personal, of not trying to affect my right to be free. You should not tell me what to do. And this is what they call as negative face. So our personal sphere that shouldn't be affected too harshly, normally, by default, by an interlocutor. And there is then a positive face, which is our social image, the individual desire of a person that his or her personality is appreciated by others. In this sense, we all want to be liked by others, don't we? We all hope that the image that we have of ourselves corresponds to the image that other people have of our persona. And this means that when someone praises us, perhaps publicly, in front of others, they are doing some positive face work. They are boosting our face. What Andrew said at the beginning of this talk, his very kind words, in a way, and which is very conventional. In any case, when an academic talk is to be delivered, they were boosting my positive face. They were aimed at portraying my persona as an academic in a positive way for the benefit of the audience. So the face work was oriented to a positive orientation, direction. However, many criticisms have been made towards this classification because it is quite Anglo-centric, it is quite westernized, Western-oriented. It has been emphasized by many scholars in the East that, for instance, social identity in Chinese and Japanese societies is a different concept than it is in Western societies. Whilst giving face, personal and social identities are maintained, affirmed, or promoted. And there is some sort of like a stronger, perhaps, emphasis on positive face in Eastern society, in contrast with Western societies. This said in very superficial terms. Again, there is so much more to be said about this. When face is at play, rapport among interlocutors also can be enhanced, maintained, neglected, or challenged. So when we enhance the rapport, we use language as an action to strengthen or enhance the harmonious relations between interlocutors. We all know, or at least the sinologists, who are interested, who are attending this seminar, all know the importance that harmony plays in Chinese interaction. On the other hand, rapport maintenance underpins the desire to maintain or protect harmonious interactions between interlocutors. Then rapport can also be neglected. So when linguistically we display the lack of concern or interest in the quality of relations between interlocutors, and then we can also challenge the rapport. We want to challenge or impair harmonious relations among interlocutors. All of these dimensions are very important for the study that we developed, and they connect with a notion that is very dear to me, which is the one of intersubjectivity, which is also what my forthcoming book for Cambridge University Press is about. Intersubjectivity underpins the speaker's extra propositional surplus of meaning that is centered on the hearer's projected reaction to the utterance. Intersubjectivity is related to theory of mind. In children, generally develops around the 4th year of age. We learn around that age not to express things just as propositions. I want the milk, I want to go out, I'm hungry, I'm tired. But we also learn to take into account how what we say might affect our interlocutors. And this is very often communicated via pragmatic markers of many different kinds or idiomatic formulae that very often occur at the end or the beginning of sentences or turns at talk. Things such as, surely, you know what I mean, believe it or not, isn't it? If I was to say, this is a very interesting presentation, isn't it? After saying, this is a very interesting presentation, I wouldn't need to say, isn't it, at the end of the sentence. The reason I do that is because I am concerned about the fact that I would really like you as the interlocutor or the addressee of my expression to agree with me. And so by using this thing, I am trying to push you to be in agreement with what I just said. I might simply say what I said without it, but because the reason why I use it is because I am monitoring your potential reactions of what I'm saying, currently saying, and they try to overtly codify them linguistically. Intersubjectivity is expressed then as a surplus over propositions, and is specifically addressee or socially oriented. I can say, actually, I'm tired now versus I'm tired now. Actually is used to prepare the addressee about the fact that I'm tired, which might be potentially displeasing for the addressee. And as a result, I use this adverbial at the beginning of the sentence to monitor what is going on there. Similarly, if I want to just say, you're a freak, I could say that propositionally, right? But very often we don't do that. We just use these bits, with these chunks of language that are a surplus of language. They are additional to the bare proposition of saying you're a freak. And you're a freak would be a face threat, will damage your social image, will damage your feelings and emotions. And as a result, I might be trying to mitigate what I'm about to say with these chunks of language that that help me to express this intersubjectively. What is really interesting about Chinese is that this dimension that is periphrastic in English and many other languages of the world, by periphrastic I mean we can express it with sentences or larger chunks of language. In Chinese it has become grammar. So this dimension, intersubjectivity, in Chinese has grammaticalized into specific particles. Mandarin sentence final particles, otherwise called LUCCs, are non-obligatory operators of rapport maintenance and intersubjectivity, and they have the tendency to occur at the end of the sentence. We can really imagine a schematic way to express a Chinese utterance in a way that there is a propositional space where we express the contents of a proposition, and then there is a non-obligatory but very likely intersubjective space where we add those little particles at the end of the sentence, right? These are the ones that we've seen appearing in the video at the beginning of this presentation. One case in point is, for instance, the particle pa that is used to code suggestions, engaging the hearer in a physical or epistemic coaction. It is a fact that pa originally was used as let's is used now in English. So to propose to do something together with the addressee. So so let's go to have a meal together. And with this pa at the end of the sentence, I will express this let's. Come on, let's do this together. Then diachronically, we have shown that this pa started more and more being used epistemically. So not just to say, come on, let's do this together, but it started more and more to be used to be said to express belief. So come on, let's believe this together. Come on, what I'm saying, what I'm thinking, why don't you also think this together with me? Let's do this. Let's engage in this coaction, in this joint project. This is a case, for instance, when we got there, it was probably 10 o'clock. So in this case, we have 可能, meaning probably, and then we will have this sentence final pa at the end of the sentence that again could be dropped, is not needed, but for some reason is very likely to be there in Chinese interaction. So again, here is, we are not simply making a mere evaluation limited to the modal qualification of the state of affairs. With pa, the speaker additionally takes care of his rapport with the hearer and endorses her or him with the authority of confirming the validity of the proposition. Let's take a look once again at one of the statements that we saw at the beginning in the light of what we just said so far. Nothing new, simply perhaps we have a more informed way to listen to this evaluation. So apart from, I really like I really like the Beijing dialect of this guy. 可能有这样的想法吧。So probably I have this kind of thinking, this kind of thought, and then we have this pa at the end. So again, probably that's what I thought. I think that's what I thought. Pa. There is no need whatsoever to use this pa, to have this let's, right? This guy is simply talking about what he thinks or what he imagines could have been the case. Nonetheless, he marks this proposition as a joint project. So what this guy here is saying is meant to be epistemically shared by this addressee here. So I'm expressing what I think, but that's not the end of the story. I'm expressing what I think really with the hope, the marked hope, intention, that you will also concur and agree with what I'm saying. This same thing could be said about a and many other particles in Chinese. All right. How did we show this linguistically? We looked at two comparable spoken corpora of Mandarin Chinese that are the call-home corpora that include, one of Mandarin Chinese and one of American English, that include 120 unscripted telephone conversations between native speakers, respectively, each including 250,000 words. And we perform a corpus-driven retrieval of the most frequent modalized evaluations in the two corpora, which resulted in could, should, would for English, and hui, meaning to be able, to be the case that in Chinese, 可以, to be allowed, to be in the conditions of, and ya, to want, to must for Mandarin. We looked at the rapport orientation, and that's the way we coded it, we marked it in the two languages. I won't get too much into the detail of this annotating procedure, simply for a reason of time. I don't want to make this too long, but basically we coded when rapport enhancement was at play. So when an evaluation was made in order to improve the phase and the rapport between the interlocutors, rapport enhancement realized propositionally, so through appraisals and positive comments made directly about the addressee. Rapport maintenance, so when potential reactions to the utterance will also be marked formally with presence of, as we said, particles, pragmatic markers, as we saw before, when the rapport was neglected, when rapport was challenged, and when rapport was challenged propositionally. So again, when we linguistically wanted or ended up by affecting negatively the relationship with our interlocutor. These are some cases of annotation, so this would be a case of rapport enhancement. So, 然后你再想干别的呀什么的，你这也可以走哦，很好的。Then if you feel like doing something different, you can also leave, isn't it? Which is pretty good. So this is like the conditional outcome is made overt linguistically. So we make an evaluation that is aimed at improving our relationship with interlocutor. Something similar is from our data set in English. I could go to Buffalo. I was going to say, yes, you could do that, and we could drive. Again, similar phenomenon here. And these are other cases of annotation where propositional phase is expressed. So when we are just like praising our interlocutor, rapport maintenance is at play. So again, when we make an evaluation by overtly taking into account how the interlocutor might react as a result of what we are saying, this will be the case for English. Well, if I wanted to have a child, I should do it, you know, and so that pushed me. So all of these are extra propositional elements that we use intersubjectively, again, to maintain our rapport with our interlocutors. And then things like rapport challenge. So when we use evaluations to that may result in a phase threat. In that case, adverbials that prepare the addressee for something discomforting might be used at the beginning of the evaluation, such as frankly, I have to tell you. So you should not be cutting corners on putting that file together. This is an obvious phase threat, and we can prove this by saying, I'm sorry to tell you, but frankly, blah, blah, blah. These were all like annotating criteria for the coding of our data. This is a string of annotation taking into account a number of dimensions. So what we did was basically like to look at the DNA in a way of interactional behavior when evaluations were made in the two languages. So we were looking at the modal extremes. This will be a case of one evaluation. So the extreme could, whether there was a speaking subject, whether there was a syntactic subject, whether we had present sentence final pragmatic markers, which pragmatic markers they were, the polarity of the sentence, negative or positive, the modal meaning, where it was dynamic, where it was deontic, which means having to do with someone's will, someone's desire, having to do with someone's epistemic reflection, the rapport, and then the propositional framework. That is whether we will do this propositionally, so say something about what we think about the addressee. We can now move to look at the results of our study. So the first thing that emerged is that propositional phase is quite different in the two languages. As we can see by the yellow bit in the bar plots, is very infrequent in the two languages. So we very infrequently, for obvious reasons, tell about an addressee what we think about them. So I think you're stupid, or I think you're fantastic. However, as we can see, there is a significant mismatch between Chinese and English. Chinese, comparatively speaking, is a lot more likely to have evaluations that directly go and target the addressee either positively or negatively than English. As we can see in English, the negative phase is much more protected, so we don't want to really disclose too much our evaluations when the identity of our interlocutor is at play, the persona, the social image of our interlocutor is at play. Specifically concerning this yellow part here, we can look at this other plot, bar plot, and we can look at when this sort of propositional phase occurs to improve relations or to damage interpersonal relations. So as a phase enhancement, enhancing act, or a phase threat. And we can see how in Chinese, the green bit, phase enhancement is so much more frequent than phase threat. Whereas in English, we have very, very little phase enhancement, so very little complements. Comparatively speaking, when propositional phase is at place, a lot more phase threats. And this is something that I also experienced myself, for instance, at conferences in academia. So when a professor or an academic meets another professor, very often there are a lot of compliments in Chinese academia or from Chinese academics. So it happened to be like, Tantucci, your work is outstanding. I read this incredible paper, which to some degree is something that is quite culture specific. We don't have such strong evaluational disclosure in English interaction, and this is quite an important cross-cultural mismatch between the two languages. An important contribution of our study is the one of illocutional concurrences, which are some sort of machine learning driven, corpus driven convergences of form, meaning, context, and pragmatic effects. So what we looked at was at how all of these dimensions will holistically work together in the two languages, simply put. And what we did was then feed the machine with all of this information and train this machine to simulate interaction and to simulate evaluations in the two languages and to predict how evaluations would be realized in the two languages. And this is a conditional inference tree, a result of our prediction. And this is a conditional inference tree for Chinese. This, simply put, what does it do is to simulate interaction when it unfolds in form of evaluations in Mandarin Chinese. So as we can see here, for instance, when the modal meaning is deontic or Boulomaic, and this is the p-value indicating that this is a significant, statistically driven result, and when the rapport is meant to be the enhancing, and when there is not a speaking subject in the sentence, koi is the kind of modal marker that will be used. Similarly, when the modal meaning is dynamic or epistemic, and the polarity is negative, in that case, hui is the modal marker that would be used. And this will be one illocutional concurrence, which is the one I just described. So modal meaning of a particular kind. I, as a speaker, want to improve my rapport with my interlocutor. Then formally, it is likely that I will use an evaluation that doesn't include the subject and includes 可以, something like this. 你可以写过来吧? You can definitely send it to me. And this is precisely what will be predicted and simulated by the machine. So as you can see, machines are not just what Siri does when we ask where a restaurant is, but they can be trained to actually engage in pragmatic and situated interaction. Now we can look at American English, and the first thing that we can see is that the tree here is so much simpler, isn't it? In this case, we have so much less complexity, right? There is quite almost a direct convergence between modality, the meaning of the models that we use, and the evaluations that we make. So again, if we use a deontic modality, that is a way to tell someone what to do, basically, very often, and then the polarity is positive, we use should. Thank you very much. This is actually the meaning of should as such. There is very little rapport, very little at play when it comes to social and interaction behavior, as in Chinese. And this brings to the fore the notion of illocutional complexity. So what we then did was that to reproduce many of these simulations, many of them, to try to achieve a very solid prediction in the two languages and see the degree to which each of the dimensions that we took into account will be important in each language. And what we found was that first and foremost, Chinese has much more complexity than English. So we can see that these are effect sizes. They basically measure the importance of each of these dimensions. There is much more going on here than here, right? In English, there is almost all the modal meaning of the auxiliary that we use is almost the only variable. There is something devoted to rapport, of course. It's not that English speakers are all autistic, so to say, they care about their interlocutors, but to not to the same degree as Chinese speakers do. In fact, rapport here is the most important predictor, so intersubjectivity. So once again, the degree to which I'm concerned about the way you will react as a result of my evaluation. In Chinese, we care a lot. In English, we care a lot less, right? And then all these other variables. I won't get too much into detail of this. These are how we fit this dimension into a two-dimensional plane more easily. This different Well, and we can see, for instance, how all of these in green are the particles that characterize Chinese at this end of the sentence. So we can see a lot of complexity in that sense. In red, we have the lexemes. In purple, we have the social actions that we perform. So as we can see, we have a convergence, for instance, here between rapport enhancement, the usage of KI, and the on-tip modality, which in turn is what we saw here. Don't worry if this is very complex. This is simply to say that with a careful analysis, it is possible to look at convergences of forms and meanings in the two languages. Again, we can see how much simpler is the map that we obtain for the American English plot. And to conclude this presentation, we then finally performed another machine learning analysis that was specifically focused on intersubjective markers, so pragmatic markers. This is not part of the paper. This is something that I performed specifically for this presentation. What we did was to feed the machine with all the dimensions that we saw before, apart from the language, and see whether it was possible to train a machine to predict language and cultural diversity based on the way intersubjective markers such as, you know, I mean, well, oh, right, and then all these Chinese particles that we saw, ma, a, shipa, whatever it is, and whether it was possible to predict, okay, these are Chinese people talking, all right, these are English people talking, again, without telling the machine that these were English words and these were Chinese words. And what this plot shows is that the further apart the particles are from one another, the more cultural distance, the more interactional difference there is. So as we can see, we have here a cluster that is basically all referring to English expressions, and here we have a completely separated cluster of Chinese way to manage and modulate intersubjectivity. This can be visualized even better on a two-dimensional plane, whereby the yellow squares, in this case, we can identify them as pertaining to English, which are very further apart from the red triangles that pertain to Chinese. The size of each dot, of each icon, stands for the frequency of each of them in the interactions that we analyzed. To conclude, there are, as you can see, these conclusions that I will make very briefly, and that's the end of my presentation. Evaluations vary cross-linguistically and cross-culturally. These are conclusions. So evaluations are not the same in all languages and all cultures. The second one, prepositional face work underpins the speaker making an overt, positive or negative evaluation of the hearer's persona. And as we saw, in Chinese, Mandarin speakers are much more likely to directly make evaluations about their interlocutors than American English speakers. Mandarin evaluations have higher elocutional complexity, so Chinese speakers think about much more dimensions when they make evaluations than American English speakers. American English speakers simply say what they think. I think this is like that. They care much less interactionally about how their interlocutors might react, how harmony might be corrupted or affected by what they think. Evaluations in Mandarin are distinctively connected. There is a typo here with rapport maintenance. There is less concern, again, in American English to the effect of evaluations. Mandarin evaluations have frequent and grammaticalized use of markers of intersubjectivity. Then the very communicative act of evaluation, again, as we said, varies from Mandarin to American English. As we can see, in Chinese, evaluations occur as joint projects that are to be shared with an addressee. In American English, the expectation of harmonious interaction is not significantly marked. Finally, cross-cultural variation combines textual and behavioral mismatches. These differences, and this is a very important assumption of the study, can inform the machine learning ability to predict language difference and event-specific patterns of behavior. Finally, machines can learn how to account for the addressee's reactions to an utterance. This is a very important finding towards the agenda of artificial theory of mind in artificial intelligence. And with this, I think I may conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for your time.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Vittorio. It's a real tour de force. I know I speak for a number of people in the China Centre when I say we've been looking forward to this talk since it appeared on our website, and it really hasn't let us down. I see one quick question in the Q&A. And I'm feeling an itch to abuse the chair's prerogative. So I might ask the question from the Q&A first, and if no more appear by the time you've answered that, then I'll dive into my own questions. We've got the question from Summer, which is whether you've got a tree like the one you were showing for the American English for British English, or I might add also any other languages. Any ideas about what any other languages might look like, or what you would hypothesize what they would look like, just based on anecdotal evidence or your own knowledge of those languages?
This is a really, really good question. Thank you, Summer. I don't know if you can see me right now. I don't think I need the slides anymore. Perhaps, I don't know if Adam could just like make me appear once again, so that people can put a face on my voice.
Yes, you're on screen now.
Oh, nice. All right. I cannot see myself, so that's why I'm saying this. To answer this question, we haven't done it with British English. I think it will be very interesting to do so. We have a paper that is forthcoming for applied linguistics, where we actually looked again at the difference between American English and Mandarin, underpinning priming and resonance. So the way we express, we resonate with what we just heard. So the way we sound similar to what an interlocutor has just expressed. With reference to your question, however, I do believe that there is quite an interesting typological and cross-cultural variation underpinning evaluations. So I do believe that, for instance, languages of the Southeast might tend to converge, such as Thai, Chinese, Vietnamese, might kind of converge towards this tendency of overtly accounting for the reactions of the addressee when we express what we think, or when we make an assertion, when some sort of like information transmission is at play. And I'm pretty sure that English in that case will comparatively be similar to other Romance languages, whereby this sort of concern is less overt, is less evident. We have a paper that we recently submitted with another colleague in linguistics, Daniel Van Olment, where we look at attention getting in different languages, and we compare Dutch, British English, Italian, and Chinese. And what we found is that, like, Germanic languages, when attention getting is at play, are very assertive. So when we say just like, look, Vittorio, I have something to tell you. When we gather attention from an addressee pragmatically, we do it to just express statements as they are, without much embellishment, without much markers that are centered on the reactions of interlocutors, whereas in Chinese, but also in Italian, interestingly, so much more concern is at play, also overtly, also linguistically, concerning the way interlocutors might react. So, to answer to your question, I don't have a tree for English, for British English, but there is some research, forthcoming research that will look at that as well. Thank you for the question. It was a good one.
Thank you, Summer. Thanks, Vittorio, and thanks, Summer, too, for the question. Now, I'm very hesitant to abuse this privilege because I'm obviously a Bawaihan. I know nothing about linguistics except from my own experience of learning Chinese. But I'm wondering in my mind whether or how you would deal with the possibility of alternative explanations for the observations that you've laid out. In particular, one that sort of came into my mind was the extent to which these particles in Chinese could they possibly just be a matter of a sort of a way of creating or constructing what we might call a tone? What gave me the idea was the idea of a LUCI. So in other languages, we might have other ways of transmitting a tone, which might not be as amenable to observation and quantification as the ba or the ma. I mean, to take the example of asking a question in Chinese, where we add the ma at the end, whereas in English or many other languages, we might just raise the tone of our voice at the end to indicate a question. And whether that's the sort of thing that the machine would actually pick up as a marker in the same way and count. So I'm just wondering about that possibility of alternative explanations and whether you've already sort of knocked those out.
That is a very welcome question, a very good, very smart question, and I completely see your point. The thing is, first of all, LUCIs, sentence final particles, don't have a tone, right? It's like they don't retain the tone, and they are not obligatory, so they are added at the end of the sentence to modulate what we just said. The example that you made about Ni hao ma, in that case, that ma would not be included in our survey precisely because that is obligatory. That actually turns an assertion into a question, precisely because that is not achieved via word order in Chinese, but precisely with the addition of this overt particle in Chinese, and that was not part of our survey. However, what has been found in cognitive linguistics in general is that at the periphery of turns at talk and sentences, we always add some chunks of language that modulate intersubjectivity. Things such as isn't it in English, things such as no in Italian, or things such as believe it or not at the beginning of the sentence in English. So whereas in Chinese these things are extremely grammaticalized and they become part of the system of the language, while in English they didn't reach such a process of grammaticalization. This fact also is further evidence to suggest that this dimension is much more prominent in these languages than in Romance languages, in Germanic languages, and languages of this kind. So yes, this is yes, there is another point that I wanted to make. What is interesting is that when we look at language change, the more adverbs, the more like some chunks of language the part from the center of the clause, the sentence, so the actual propositional meaning of what we're saying, and the more they move towards the periphery of the sentence, the more they acquire an intersubjective meaning. Think about adverbs such as apparently, or clearly, or evidently. When I use apparently at the beginning of the sentence, I am not referring to something that appears at sight anymore. This form grammaticalized to some degree and acquired a specific and intersubjective meaning. So if I say apparently it's raining now in Rio de Janeiro, what I'm actually expressing is that it's not something that I'm seeing at sight, it's precisely the opposite. And what I'm expressing is that I've heard from people that this is the case. I intersubjectively share the piece of information that in Rio is actually raining at the moment. So as we can see, the more we move, the more the language moves to sentence periphery, either at the right or the left, the more intersubjectivity at play. And languages of the Southeast are very special in that sense, because through time and through history, they mostly move towards the right-hand side of the periphery, sentence periphery. They are also at the left, it's not just like exclusively there. But they developed a proper grammatical category of intersubjectivity that, beware, is not obligatory. So I can add the pa at the end of the sentence, but I also can omit it.
Thanks very much. I do have a follow-up, but the audience has started to get involved, so I'll turn to them first and see if we have time to come back to that. Yeah. We've got an anonymous question who starts with a face-giving fantastic talk, and based on the corpus that you've used, which is mainly on spoken languages, do you think the research finding about differences between Mandarin and American English are primarily spoken language based, or could it be also in written language, or is written language different?
Thank you very much. Before I answer, can I just go and get a glass of water, because my throat is completely dry.
You're on mute, Vittorio.
All right, I made it, I think.
That's better. So the question was about the extent to which these findings would also apply to the written languages.
That's a very good question. They would, of course, but to a lesser degree. So generally, diachronically, the way we speak becomes the way we write roughly 200 years later. So what we generally like, the way we express ourselves in the spoken language tends to crystallize and become conventional also in the written language later on. So we might see such differences, of course in the written language as well, but they might not be as striking as they are. As a matter of fact, we carried out a similar study, specifically looking at how face work and how impoliteness unfolded throughout the history of Mandarin Chinese. In which case, we did look at written sources, and we could actually trace how face work changed also throughout the history of Wen Yan Wen and Bai Hua Wen, and how the beginning of the 20th century was a fundamental stage for this sort of like shift also in the way face is expressed linguistically. So yes, that's a very good question, and to answer it, there is quite a difference between the two registers.
Next question from the Q&A really works as a follow-up to that, I think. Because what they've asked is whether you, or I suppose anyone else that you might be aware of in your field, are investigating this by collecting written language data or text from social media platforms, which, at least in my own mind, could potentially be some kind of site of crossover between the written language and the spoken language. because of the way that people interact in a much more sort of fast and sort of compressed timelines. And in a way that, would you expect to find more of this face work in social media platform language than normal sort of written language? And are there any projects out there that are investigating this?
This is another very good question, and I think we haven't been working on that. I have been doing some. I have been playing around it myself in my own spare time, but we haven't actually worked on that formally. Definitely yes, and also what is very interesting about the social media, the language of the social media, is that it involves a completely different construal of intersubjectivity. That is to say, intersubjectivity can be of two different types. It can be restricted to a specific persona, and as a result, as a child, when I'm 4 years old, I start to develop the ability to project the emotions of my mother as a result of what I'm saying. So if I'm saying, I'm hungry, I want to eat, but if I see my mother that is a bit tired, I start to think, wait a minute, I am giving her this order, but I'm also realizing that she is tired. And I will stop shouting as I used to do 1 year ago, because I have the feeling that my mother's mind also is a mind, and she might react to what I'm saying in a particular way. However, the same child will still perhaps be very loud in a restaurant when she's sitting at the table and thinking about his mother or her mother who is tired, but not realizing that other people sitting at the other tables might be affected by the fact that she's speaking too loudly. And that is an extended form of intersubjectivity. So while we have the ability to project the intersubjective reaction of one interlocutor, we may also, at later stages of ontogenetic and cognitive development, develop the ability to depict and project the way an extended audience of people may react to what we are saying. This is to say that in social media, as well as in a context as such as the present one, our intersubjectivity when we interact with one another is not limited to just like ourselves, me and you, Andrew, but it also includes the way all of these people, this society, might react as a result of what we are saying. And that is a more effortful, a more complex form of theory of mind and intersubjectivity, which also corresponds to slightly different linguistic strategies that we use in order to address that. So to answer to this question, it will be a very interesting project, not only because the register will be different, but also because the cognitive mechanisms at play would also be of a different kind, a different nature.
Thanks, fascinating. There's another terrific question here in the Q&A from, as a native Chinese, I'm aware that the use of interjections varies largely across regions, like North using more imperative tones, while the South, particularly in the Jiangnan area, may use more euphemistic tones. So how can you distinguish whether the interjections used in the communications, presumably in Mandarin, are pragmatically used or just an instinctual habit?
The two things are the same. So pragmatic is not a mechanicistic way to strategically devise utterances. Pragmatics is nothing but our ability to interact with someone and to project this person's reactions to the utterance. So again, when we speak with Siri, Siri doesn't use these things. And why doesn't she do that? Because she only talks propositionally. So of course, I realized that the linguistic tradition didn't pay much attention to this. The attention was always given to propositions and to how we express meaning through nouns, verbs, and the like. On the other hand, these things are all over the place in all languages of the world, and actually they are less at play in people affected by autistic syndrome. With autism, the employment of these things decreases a lot, significantly. And that is because across the autistic spectrum, there is a deficient ability to monitor and project the emotions and the reactions of an interlocutor to what we are saying. As a result, people with the ASD find relevant only to convey what is propositional, the proposition of an information, but they struggle to modulate and to account for how what they are saying might sound more or less interesting, how might sound more or less displeasing, and so on and so forth. So again, the fact that we use them automatically is because we automatically try to project and modulate other people's interaction and the way they react to what we are saying.
Next question is almost like another follow-up, actually. To what extent did your data, and I think what they may be referring to is the corpus that you used to build the AI experiment. To what extent did the data actually take account of these interregional differences within China in the use of LUCI?
That's a very relevant question. And these corpora are called the call-home corpora, and they are comparable data sets of language. So people taking part to this experiment were all speakers of Mandarin, I think from the same northern region of China, I think in the neighborhood of I think Hebei, I suspect. So in that sense, this very important element was controlled for experimentally. Otherwise, I absolutely agree with the person who asked the question that regional variation, and I wouldn't even refer to these as dialects. Sinitic languages are languages. They are different languages rather than dialects, and of course, we will have completely different results from one language to another.
Bit of a different direction now from the Q&A. This one's from Alicia. How does one begin to train AI to understand pragmatics?
With a little bit of patience. You need to, I generally use RStudio, and the learning curve is quite steep at the beginning, but as some of my PhDs might tell you, it's also very rewarding, because then you may realize that language is so complex, it's extremely complex. So if we want to really capture how language unfolds naturalistically, we need to be able to rely on extremely complex methods to reveal this. And machine learning techniques are a very good way to analyze this and actually to feed into AI research. So I think linguistics is a very exciting moment for linguistics and linguists, precisely because we are developing the capacity to provide very important evidence and models for development of machines who can simulate emotions, and even, as I suggested at the end of the presentation, theory of mind.
Thanks very much, Vittorio. Now, it looks like we've got, it looks like there's one new question in here. Another anonymous Q&A asks simply, how do you see the application of this research, presumably in a sort of real world setting? What are people potentially going to be able to do with this insight about differences in the way that Chinese speakers use these particles?
Well, there are a number of different applications. One may simply underpin an increased knowledge about ontogenetic development and whether like children, the stages in which children acquire the ability to express and to project other people's emotions and intersubjectivity. Another one, of course, is in clinical research underpinning ASD and autism, and the degree to which autism can be analyzed as a gradient phenomenon and not simply like you're autistic, you're not, or high level or low level. There is so much more, and language in that sense can be extremely powerful if modeled in a very fine-grained fashion. And finally, of course, as I was suggesting previously, to develop conversational interfaces, so machines that can interact with us, not simply by responding to a stimulus that is a proposition, but actually understanding when we are annoyed, or understanding when we are happy, or when themselves can also try and reproduce emotions, beliefs, and the like.
Terrific. Okay. We're just coming up on 4:30, so I want to really thank you again, Vittorio, for a terrific presentation and a conversation afterwards to match. And I really hope that it won't be long before we can have you back to learn about yet another of your outstanding pieces of research. Maybe a talk on your upcoming book, The Theory of Social Mind. If you would be agreeable to that. So thanks again for coming, and thanks to everyone in the audience as well. Thanks for your questions, and please join us for the next event next month. So thank you and good afternoon.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye-bye, everyone.